transportation planning, public transport, highway engineering, pavement engineering, geotechnical engineering, road safety, water transportation, geomatics, transport economics and management. We have our head office located at Akkulam in Thiruvananthapuram district, and we have two regional offices, one at Kozhikode, most in the northern part of Kerala, and the second one at Ernakulam, at the middle of Kerala. The scientific and technical staff are organized into 5 scientific divisions, namely Transportation Planning and Engineering Division, Traffic Engineering and Safety Division, Highway and Bridges Division, Water Transport and GS Division, Information Liaison and Training Division. So these are the 5 different the divisions under NATPAC. Our research and other technical activities are governed by a research council, and these are the research council chairman and members are from IITs, NITs, state government, and the research institute. We have been organizing a series of this monthly lectures, online lectures, basically TransTech talk series, which will be beneficial not only to the scientists of NATPAC. We have seen that one students across India, then other researchers, faculty, then the stakeholders or the department, the engineers are also normally they will attend this program. So far, we have completed 5 talks. All the divisions they have organized one each the talk from the division. This is the second series in which lesson the 6th one organized by Traffic Engineering and Safety Division under the headship of Sanjay Kumar, and the scientist under this Traffic Engineering and Safety Division. They are basically concentrating on the traffic safety and related the research and development activities. With this brief introduction about the institute, I welcome today's speaker, Dr. Sunanda Dissanayake, the Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at KSCSTE State University. Welcome you, Madam, to this talk series, and we are happy that you have accepted our invitation, and thank you for that one. And we welcome you to this session. In addition to that one, we have the participants from different the institutes, IITs, NITs, the government engineering colleges, and other research organizations there. So I welcome all of you to this the TransTech series. And on behalf of NATPAC, I welcome all of you once again to this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Now let me request Mr. David Sam, who's scientist of NATPAC, to give a brief introduction of the speaker of the day.
Dr. Sunanda Dissanayake is the chair and professor of the Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering Department at KSCSTE State University. Formerly, she was professor of Civil Engineering and the associate dean of the graduate school at KSCSTE State University. She obtained her bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Moratau in Sri Lanka, Master of Engineering degree from Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand, and Ph.D. from the University of South Florida, after which Madam joined KSCSTE State University as a assistant professor in 2002. Madam has been the PA and co-PA of numerous research projects in traffic engineering and highway safety. She has authored and co-authored more than 55 journal papers and presented more than 170 papers at international, national, and regional conferences. Dr. Dissanayake is a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers and has received the prestigious Fulbright Award. She has been highly active in several professional societies, journal editorial boards, TRB technical committees, and has been the chair of Transportation Safety Committee of ASCE for more than 10 years.
Thank you, ma'am. Now it's time to hear from you, ma'am. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and also inviting me to make this presentation. It is really nice to finally give a presentation to a group of professionals who can say my name correctly. So I really like that. So, as it was mentioned, I'm currently with the Kennesaw State University, and I'm pretty new here, to be honest. And right now I am in an administrative role as the department chair. So in my previous institution, which is also KSU, Kansas State University, I was very active as a researcher, but with time, after all the promotions and things, I thought I can do a better job forming the next generation of engineers, being a leader. As it was mentioned earlier, I mean, we don't really have too many female leaders in these academic institutions. So I thought I can do a bigger role in serving in this capacity. So some of the studies that I'm going to talk about from my previous state, Kansas. So please bear with me on that one. So with that, I think I'm going to start my technical talk. Can you confirm you can see my slide?
Yeah, ma, it's visible.
Okay. So the topic that I've selected is data-driven road design and policy decisions based on traffic safety considerations. And I'm going to talk about 2 case studies on how we can use this transportation-related research into practice and the implications that we have on the society and the road users. So I think those of us who are in transportation community, we all know the importance of highway safety. So when you have that introduction, you have traffic operations and safety as one of the areas. We know that many lives are lost every year as a result of motor vehicle crashes, whether it is here in the United States or India or Sri Lanka or wherever you are looking at. A number of fatalities and injuries from these motor vehicle crashes are very large number, enormous number. We may not even know the actual magnitude of the human life lost. However, safety aspect is sometimes missing in the decision-making process. We make decisions, whether those are roadway design policies or policy decisions, based on other factors, and safety and the crash impacts are not sometimes considered. So because of the economic losses or the cost associated with these motor vehicle crashes, it is important to consider this safety aspect in the decision-making process. So it is true that we cannot really put a value on a human life loss, but still engineers do that, and we have that billions and billions of funds that we are losing every year because of these motor vehicle crashes. So what we are trying to do here is to use historical and other collected data so that we can use those data-driven approaches to make decisions about road design and also policies. So as I mentioned, we are going to talk about 2 case studies here, 2 different ones. So the first case study is about safety effectiveness of bypass lanes at unsignalized rural intersections. So this is a little bit of a different project where the focus is on rural areas. So now you might be wondering, what is this bypass lane? So if a vehicle is stopped at in a through travel lane in a 2-lane roadway, 2-lane means we have 1 lane in each direction. So if you have a vehicle, other vehicle is going to overtake, there's no way to do that because you have only 1 lane. So what we are doing here at bypass lanes is you add that additional lane only for a certain small stretch at that intersection so that you can have that vehicle overtake the other waiting vehicle. So there could be 3-leg intersections or 4-leg intersections in terms of bypass lanes. So the agency was interested in knowing whether they had to continue to do this practice or whether they are really wasting their money in trying to build these bypass lanes. So this figure shows how it is going to look like in real world. You know, you have the vehicle, the van, which is trying to make the left turn. The other one is overtaking the other vehicle. So the research question or the design or policy decision here is, should the agency continue to spend funds, keep on adding the bypass lanes? So here in the United States, each and every state has a very extensive crash database. So in this case, we use the crash database from the state of Kansas, and we have to identify the locations where the bypass lanes were present. So there are two different ways that you can consider that. You consider a fixed distance. In this case, in the literature, commonly we use 300 feet. Of course, we are still using the US customary units here along each of the approaches leading to the intersection, or you can consider crashes at the location which are labeled as intersection related. So in that case, we do not consider any particular fixed distance. So these are two different approaches you can consider in looking at the crashes. It is also important to note that here in the US, we prefer to use the word crashes instead of accidents because we believe that crashes could be addressed either by road design or education on all those countermeasures we have. So I'll be using the word crashes throughout my presentation. So in the crash database, we can identify the county, the city, the distance from the named intersection, the exact latitude and longitude of the location and all that. And we transform those things into Google Earth and where you can map each one. In addition to that, state also has very extensive state traffic count map available. However, this is not the case for very small roadways to which these 2-lane roadways may be connecting. So I will talk about that a little bit later. So in order to evaluate the safety approach, we have two commonly used methods. We have before and after studies and with and without studies, which are also known as cross-sectional studies. So first, I'm going to talk about this safety analysis that we conducted using before and after studies. So this is relatively straightforward. What we are doing is we are comparing crash data before the bypass lane implementation versus crash data after adding the bypass lane. So one of the challenges that we faced here is we did not know the exact timing of the implementation of the bypass lanes because these are small rural locations, not very big roadways with a lot of traffic. So even the area engineers were not precisely sure about the implementation, date of implementation, which is critical when you are considering these before and after studies. And for that reason, we did not completely rely on before and after. We also considered that with and without scenario. So when you look at the sample size, we had a couple of options in considering the time period. Typically in safety analysis, we consider 3 years time period, which is kind of the compromise between the desire to have a decent sample size and without too many changes in other things within that time period. However, since this is rural intersections that we are talking about, that may not be sufficient. So we looked at 3 years and 4 years and 5 years. So you can see the sample size, the number of intersections we can consider. I also want to mention that in addition to the things that I'm mentioning here, we also conducted a survey and actual speed data collection and all those things. And I'm not going to go into too much details with those things because of the time limitation. So this is before and after studies. And in this case, what we are doing is we are conducting simple hypothesis testing. So we want to see whether there is a statistical difference in crash frequency before and after adding the bypass lanes. So in this case, it is the crash frequency or the number of crashes that we are looking at. So we have different considerations here. And then the y-axis, we have the average crash frequency. So this red means this is before the implementation of the bypass lane. And then you have the after conditions. You can see it is, in most cases, it goes down, but here in this last one intersection related, it has gone up. But if you look at these numbers, as engineers, you know that just because there is a difference in the numbers, we cannot say this is statistically significant. So that is why we conduct the F.ASCE testing. So one of the easy ways to see whether there is a statistically significant difference is to look at the P statistic. So here we are conducting the F.ASCE testing, and you can see for the intersection related crashes, for 3-leg intersections, it is statistically significant because that number is less than or close to 0.05 in this case. And then in the previous slide, when we were looking at the number of crashes, it does not consider severity into account. For that reason, we want to see whether there is an impact on the severity. Typically, in the United States, when you look at the crash databases, you have severity recorded under 3 categories: fatal crashes, injury crashes, and property damage only. One way to account for this severity is to convert those high severity ones, basically fatalities and injuries, into an equivalent number of property damage only crashes. So different states use different values in converting those injury and fatality crashes into PDOs. So in the state of Kansas, the factor that is commonly used is 15, and use the same factor for both injury and fatality. So we utilized those numbers and converted fatal and injury crashes, and then we refer to that as EPDO crashes. So this one shows the statistical test using those EPDO crashes, basically by considering the severity into account. So again, we have the numbers after the implementation of the bypass lanes, and then we conduct statistical testing, and you can see that if you consider 0.1 statistical significance level, it is significant for 4-leg intersections when you consider 300 feet intersection box. Now, if you consider just the frequency, that is not going to be sufficient because, of course, if you have more traffic, more people using an intersection, we are going to have more crashes. That is simply the exposure. So in addition to looking at the frequency, we also wanted to consider crash rates. So for each and every location, we computed the crash rate by considering the average annual daily traffic and the number of crashes per year using this expression. And now another challenge we have, which is common in some other parts of the world. So obtaining that average annual daily traffic for the minor streets, which could be a very small street in this case, because these are rural roadways, is a challenge. Well, considering crash rates is a good idea, but how do you obtain these volumes, traffic volumes? So we kind of took an approach. So what we did is in the survey form, we conducted survey among the transportation engineers, traffic engineers in the region. We asked them about the traffic volume. And then we could also find some AADT values from the crash database. We could find some others from the traffic count maps. So for those locations where none of those are available, we decide to develop a model based on various socio-economic, demographic, and traffic characteristics. So I'll take a little diversion to show how we did that one. So we considered number of variables, and the output is going to sum of average annual daily traffic or the total entering volume at the intersection. So based on the available data, we develop a model. So that means you identify the factors that are significant in making a contribution towards having these vehicles on the minor street. Again, this is not excellent or highly accurate. As you can see, R square value is 0.688, but this was better than nothing. So that means for the cases where we did not have the minor street volume available, we utilized the model and considered the total entering volume, and based on that computed the crash rate. So with that, we could compute the crash rate, and we looked at crash rate before implementation of these bypass lanes and then after implementation of the bypass lanes. Again, statistical testing, hypothesis testing to see if there is a statistical significant difference between those two numbers. So in two of the cases, intersection related 3-legged and then 300 feet box. For 4-leg intersections, there was considerable statistical significance. And that was a reduction in the crash rate after the implementation of the bypass lane. So similarly, we did the same thing for equivalent property damage only crashes, which is considered as the way to address this severity, where we pay more attention to fatal crashes and injury crashes than that is of property damage only crashes. So looking at the numbers again, only one case gave us statistically significant reduction after the implementation of bypass lanes. To summarize the results from that part, we considered multiple approaches. We have 5 years consideration, 4 years, 3 years, and then frequency, EPDO, and crash rate based on frequency and EPDO rates. So Y means there's a reduction, and then if it is significant or not is in the other one. And another consideration is the level of significance we might be considering here. If you consider 0.05 level, you might have fewer cases, which is significant. But if you raise the significance level to 10%, we have more scenarios which are statistically significant. And then, as I mentioned, safety analysis is not a definite science. You can look at things in different ways. And people question, why did you do this, not that? Maybe that would give you different results. So for that reason, we considered all possible approaches, methodologies to evaluate the scenario. So this is that second approach where you have safety analysis based on with and without studies. So the crash data at intersections with bypass lanes are compared with crash data at intersections without bypass lanes. Again, in this case, we considered crash data for 3 years. So we are following the same path like the past. So I'm going to go through this a little bit fast. So we have crash frequency we considered, we have crash rates and severities and EPDO rates. Pretty similar to the previous case, only thing is the two comparison groups are with and without, or this is a cross-sectional study. So number of intersections, we had with bypass lanes, we had 558, without 579, and you compare by conducting statistical testing. So same process. So this p-value at the bottom of the graph shows whether or how much this is significant. When the number is greater than 0.1, that means even though there is a reduction, that is not statistically significant. So this is crash frequency and then EPDO comparison, crash rate comparison, where we had to again develop a model in this case to obtain the minor street volume in some cases, and the statistical significance for crash rate. And then the second one, EPDO rate comparison. Again, multiple scenarios that we considered. So I think I'm going to go fast just to show that we followed the same process like the previous case, before and after study, and had our findings. And again, we summarized those things in a big table to show that the difference between different scenarios we considered. And the third approach we took here is using crash modification factors. So you might be familiar with this term in safety analysis. Crash modification factor is a kind of a multiplicative factor that is used to compute the expected number of crashes after implementing a given countermeasure. So if the CMF value is greater than 1, that means we are expecting an increase in crashes for the given countermeasure. If it is less than 1, that means we are making an improvement. and that is going to have a reduced number of crashes at the location. So the Highway Safety Manual provides very detailed information on how this CMF could be calculated. Again, there are a number of methods available, and in this case, we use before and after with comparison group method and case control studies. I'm going to skip the details because I want to leave some time for questions at the end. So you can see the results here. This is before and after study with comparison group. The time period they considered 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and the treatment conditions, and then finally the CMF calculation. So in pretty much all the cases, well, except one here, the CMF value is less than 1, which means that by introducing this bypass lane, we have improved safety. So there's one exception where when we considered 4-leg intersections, and by considering intersection-related crashes, there was a slight increase in the number of crashes. And then similarly, using the case control study method, again, I'll skip the methodology, but if you are interested, that whole detailed methodology is available in the Highway Safety Manual. So again, we computed the crash modification factors by using 300 feet intersection box and also considering intersection-related crashes. In almost all the cases we considered, the CMF value was less than 1.0, meaning that we are improving safety by adding these bypass lanes. So conclusions based on that, in almost all the cases, we could improve safety by adding the bypass lanes. Of course, another important consideration in the decision-making process is the cost, where you have to compute or consider a benefit cost analysis and look at the cost as well. But the general conclusion based on that one is the agency, which is the Department of Transportation in this case, would continue to use this adding bypass lanes because it brings in safety benefits to the road users. So with that, I'm moving on to the second case study. Again, safety implications due to raised speed limits on freeways in Kansas. For us in the transportation community, we cannot emphasize enough about the importance of proper speed limits. So this shows the location where they are changing the speed limit on the freeway, which is the interstate connecting major states. So proper speed limit is essential for safe and efficient traffic operations, and you have to balance these traffic operations with the safety aspect. In the US, typically when the operational conditions are not very congested, when there are good operating conditions, speeding is very common, and we pretty much always drive above the posted speed limit, which is kind of the driver behavior in this system. So the operating speeds are going to be much higher than the speed limit that we are posting. So that means if you increase the speed limit, people are going to drive even at higher speeds than that. And also we all have learned physics at some point, and if the speed is higher, if there is going to be a collision or the crash, the higher energy is going to be released. That means more damage. So if a crash happens at a higher speed, your severity is going to be high. Whereas a speed is low, you can expect the severity to be lower in general. So because of that, safety and traffic operations go hand in hand, and it is critically important to select the proper speed limit. So in the state that I'm referring here, the speed limits have been raised in several times. In 1996, they raised the speed limit on the interstate or the freeway sections from 65 to 70. And then again in July 2021, with the influence of transportation community and of course some politicians, the speed limit was increased from 70 to 75 miles per hour. So if you convert to kilometers per hour, you can see this is pretty high speed that we are talking about here. So with this increase, there was more talk after the implication that should we increase the speed limit further and should we make it to 80 miles per hour from 75? So it was important for the agency to decide what to do, what the implication of the previous speed limit increases. So this understanding will help the future decision making. So they funded the project to study the safety implications based on that raised speed limit. So the research question or the design or policy decision that we had to make here is, should the agency continue to raise the speed limits on freeways, or should we maintain that? And of course, it is very unlikely that the speed limit in a freeway would be reduced here in the US, because we drive past here, even though there are so many crashes and high severity property damage and fatalities. So the freeway sections affected by the speed limit change from 70 to 75 miles per hour. There are a number of sections, freeway sections. Some are interstate, I-35, I-70, I-135, I-335, and so forth, and some US routes. So you exactly know the beginning milepost and the end milepost where the speed limit was increased. So you have the total mileage for each section where the speed limit was increased. And total of 807 miles were affected by this speed limit increase. So from those mileage, we selected 39 uniform sections. As you know, when you identify the sections, the typical characteristics of the roadway should be pretty uniform so that you can make a meaningful comparison. So we selected 39 sections like that. And in general, if you are looking at the fatal and injury crashes and total crashes, this is how it looked like. So you looked at 3 years before, 3 years after, and just by looking at numbers, total before time period, we had 9,000 crashes, after pretty close to 9,000, but little less, and then fatal, and it is giving different messages, providing different interpretations depending on the numbers. So it showed the fact that this is not going to be enough. You have to do more detailed analysis to see whether there were safety implications based on the raised speed limit. So once again, we use the crash modification factors that I mentioned earlier. So we have, again, the methodology from the highway safety manual that we are using here. In this case, we are using before and after study using empirical based method by considering the treated sites. Treated sites meaning that the sections where the speed limit was increased. And then before and after study with comparison group by considering both treated sections, other similar non-treated sections. And then we had cross-sectional studies using negative binomial regression model. So he used all these different methods, and the data needs and data availability was different for each method. So whenever we had data available, we applied that methodology for comparison purposes. So this is the CMF calculation based on empirical based method. So I'm going to skip the detailed methodology, but these are the sections we considered. And then we have the beginning milepost and the end milepost, section length. And we calculate CMF based on total crashes and also based on fatal and injury crashes. So the numbers in green are the ones where the CMS is less than 1, meaning that in those sections, safety was improved. And the other ones where the number is greater, safety got worse. And then we wanted to see what kind of a situation we have there for the change. So in the highway capacity manual, they provided a methodology for odds ratio calculation. So based on the expression available there, we computed the odds ratio for total crashes, and then we computed odds ratio for total fatal and injury crashes. So when you consider this method, it was an increase for total crashes and also slight increase for fatal and injury crashes. So it did not really show us that it made the situation worse by increasing the speed limit. And then we looked at the variance of the odds ratio and then tested the statistically significant difference. So the treatment effect in this case was significant at 95% confident level. And for fatal and injury, it was not significant at 90% level. So that means that even though safety got a little bit better, or at least the data said that, but it was not really statistically significant. So EB method summary, safety got worse in terms of total crashes and effect crashes. Only the increase in total crashes is statistically significant. And then we use the second method, before and after study with comparison group method, and we calculated the CMF values again. So site characteristics, and you look at the CMF values, and this is the detailed results for each and every section. So we also calculate the odds ratios, and that means we had odds ratio of 1.27 for total crashes and 1.35 for fatal and injury crashes. So again, we tested the statistically significant difference between the two cases, and then the treatment effect was significant at 95% level. And then for fatal and injury, it was also statistically significant. So total crashes increased by 27%, and fatal and injury crashes increased by 35% by using this. And both of those were statistically significant at 95% level. So summary results, I did not go into the other third method which we used, but summary results were safety got worse in many of the cases that we considered. So in addition to the crash data analysis, we also conducted a speed study to compare before and after studies, looked at the 85th percentile and 50th percentile or the average values, and conducted statistical testing to see what really happened. And of course, it showed that average speeds increased. So summarize the results showed that before and after study with comparison group method presented 27% increase for total crashes and 35% increase in fatal injury crashes, both statistically significant. So this is perhaps the most reliable one, as we found out. That means by raising the speed limit, safety got worse because there were more serious or more severe crashes because of the higher speeds. So the decision was not to keep on increasing the speed limit on freeways without further study. So that was the policy implication, which was also shared with the group of individuals who were really promoting further increase in the speed limit, saying that it would benefit by reducing the travel time in long distance travel. So with that, I think I'm going to open for questions. And I want to mention that both these projects were funded by the Kansas Department of Transportation. And each case, we had a graduate student working on the project whose master's thesis or PhD dissertation was based on the study. So I want to acknowledge their contributions here as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? Anybody has got any questions? It can be either posted, or if you raise the hands, we can unmute you. Meanwhile, ma'am, for your information, Mr. Srikanth Redikunta, who happens to be your student, master's student, he's participating in this. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me unshare this.
Mr. Srikanth, you can.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. D. Actually, we'll call
after a long time.
Yeah, how are you, ma'am?
Good. Yes. Yeah. Nice to see that you are here.
I was the student of Dr. D in 2010 at Kansas State University. I mean, Dr. Sukumar sir.
Yes, I remember you.
Yeah. So, how are you, ma'am?
Pretty good. I decided to move, and after 19 years with Kansas State University, I moved to Kennesaw State University, another KSU. So now I am in a suburb of Atlanta, and I can really see traffic. You know, this is very congested city with traffic, a lot of safety issues too. But unfortunately, as an administrator, I'm not really that much involved in research. It's more about managing the department and doing other things.
Okay. when I received this mail, I mean this message regarding the event, okay, at least I got a chance to meet you after almost 13 years.
That is true.
Yeah.
So any questions for me?
Nothing is there in the chat box, ma'am, for the timing, but I have one question. Samson sir, yeah, ma'am, actually there is one question from
Yeah, you start.
Yeah, Dr. Vasudevan has got one question. He's having query on the second case study. Like, is there any influence of age on the increase of crash while increasing the speed limit? Also, can unmute and can, I think there is some confusion to the question also. What age you are mentioning?
Is there any influence of age?
Good morning, madam. Am I audible?
Yeah, Vasu, yeah.
Good morning, madam. Actually, my query was, is there an influence of age category? Like, is there, because if the speed increases or the speed limit increases, that can be the crash can be higher because of the age group also. Maybe some category of age may have higher speed or that kind of, for example, if youngsters are having higher speed or such kind of analysis has done, or is this based on the crash data only?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think that is an important consideration, but I don't think that is that applicable in this case because we are comparing the same sections. So it is kind of a reasonable assumption that we have the same age distribution among drivers, the previous 3 years versus next 3 years, right? It is unlikely to change it that much. So if you have the same conditions in the before period and after period, or with and without sections, there's not going to be that much effect from that. We assume that it is the same or pretty similar, which I think is a pretty reasonable assumption because you do not expect that to change that much. It's the pretty much same age distribution you will see. But if you look with time, I think we have an aging population in the US here. So you have more and more older drivers. That is a very important safety consideration. They still continue to drive even though they are 70, 80, 90 years old, and we have very lower reaction times and all that. In the US, it is the public transportation systems are not that great. Everybody is addicted to the vehicle. We keep driving, so they don't have any other options to move from one place to another. So the percentage of older drivers is increasing. But in this case, I don't think that is that applicable. That's a good question, though. So I think
There is
there is
another
question.
Yeah, from Mr. Shahim, who is principal scientist of NATPAC. He's asking the same rate was adopted for injuries and fatalities while estimating EPDO because 15 was taken now. So what is it correct, or what is the rationale behind that?
Yes, that depends on the geographical location. In some cases, the conversion rate for fatalities is greater than the rate for the weight for injury crashes. That is more common. But in the state of Kansas, which is more of a rural state average, so the number of fatal crashes is very small compared to number of injury crashes. So for that reason, in the rural areas, they prefer to use the same number because otherwise, if you have just one fatal crash, that is going to unnecessarily make it magnified, right? That location gets too much focus because of that one single fatal crash. Mostly what we have is injury crashes at these locations. So it is depending on the study we are conducting and also because of the location that the same weight was considered for fatal and injury. But in many other cases, we have different factors. On the other hand, researchers always question why this number, not the other. That is one of those cases where you cannot really, you don't have a definite science. It's hard to say why 15, So in some cases, you compute that based on the cost. So you have the economic cost associated with the fatal crash, and economic cost with an injury crash, and the ratio is going to be the weight factor. Again, it's kind of subjective, but based on the geographical location and type of scenario that we are considering here, the study used the 15 as the conversion factor for both fatal and injury.
Ma'am, there is another question that is from Mr. Nahansa. What is the effect of level of enforcement as for the second case? How that was accounted? What is,
Yeah, that is a very, very important question too. Again, it is unlikely to have a major effect on the findings of the study, because both in before and after time periods, we can kind of consider that the level of enforcement is the same, or with and without locations, it would be pretty similar. But enforcement is really difficult when everybody is driving really fast. I see that here a lot in Atlanta. If you know, Atlanta is a major traffic hub, millions of vehicles every day, and we have 12 lanes in each direction, still not sufficient, fully congested. And then when the level of service is good, when we are operating at a non-congested conditions, everybody is speeding like crazy, you know. So it is when everybody is going above, it is very hard to issue a ticket, right? It is hard to catch one person when everybody is driving above. So there is some level of enforcement, but I would say that the effect from that on the current study that we talk about, the second one is high. But that is a major concern in improving safety here. Level of enforcement. It is, I would say, it is very small, not much enforcement because of the vast nature, how big it is, and the resources available, but simply the difficulty in catching those people speed.
Okay. Any more questions? What is there in the chat box? I needed one clarification. Like in the first case, you considered the data for 3 year, 4 year, and 5 year. What could be the optimum time period for that?
Typically, in many of the studies, 3 years is the time period that we consider. But again, in that study, it is a rural area, so we do not really have a whole lot of crash data in each location. That is why we considered 4 years and 5 years in addition to 3. In many other traffic studies, where safety studies, where there is decent number of crash data available or the sample size is relatively acceptable, we go with 3 year time period, which I think is a balance between finding that required sample size and not too many other changes during the time period. For example, if you look at, let's say, 10 year time period, there were so many changes in the way that we operate, right? For example, cell phones may not have been this much used 10 years ago, I think the usage. There are more and more distracted drivers now because of extensive cell phone usage and then all those things. So if you consider 10 year time period, that's too long, right? Too many changes, other changes besides the one that you're studying. So for that reason, I think 3 year is kind of the ideal time. So that addresses or provides us a decent sample size and not too many other changes.
Okay. Any other questions or anything from the audience participants? Dr. Sukumaran sir, I think you are the one Renikunda was mentioning. Answer, sir?
I don't have anything, yeah, but it was a nice presentation. Can we use like your strategy to fix the speed limit of a particular stretch No, I think you used the 5 miles per hour. That steps you have used. Suppose say if I reduce that and by 1 kilometer or up by 1 kilometer, like less, what will be the effect? Whether will be in a position to study that.
So I could not really hear that great, but the question is, we considered 5 miles per hour increase, correct? If we increase by little, would be
Yes.
okay. So
Yeah.
so we did not look into that because speed limit is always going to be in the steps of 5, right? So the next option that we were considering was 80, 75 to 80. So it is always in steps of 5. For that reason, we did not look at 1, 2, and things like that. We can do that mathematically, but in the practice, that is not going to be ever implemented. It's always consider the change was from 70 to 75 miles per hour. The next consideration was from 75 to 80. In fact, some other states like Texas, they do have 80 miles per hour as a speed limit. And then recently they raised in one section to 85 miles per hour. So it's pretty high speeds in some of the sections. But Kansas did not want to do that because of this safety, the study that we conducted.
Okay. That's all, Sanjay.
One Krishnakar has raised a hand. Krishnakar, you want to ask something? So Krishnakar? Yeah, ma'am. I think there are no more questions. So with that, we can conclude. And let me request Dr. Vasudevan, our junior scientist, to deliver the formal note of thanks. Vasudevan, please.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of NATPAC, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you for joining us today for this insightful technical talk on the topic Data-Driven Roads Design and Policy Decisions Based on Traffic Safety Considerations case studies. It has been an enlightening and thought-provoking session shedding light on a critical issue that affects our daily lives. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Sunanda Dissanayake, whose expertise and knowledge have truly captivated our audience. Thank you, ma'am, for delivering an engaging and informative presentation backed by thorough research and practical insights. We are grateful for the knowledge and insights you have shared us with today. I would like to express my gratitude to all the attendees for your presence and active involvement. The questions and discussions that followed the talk showcased your deep interest in the subject matter, and I commend your engagement. Finally, I would like to thank our director, division heads, and the organizing team for their meticulous planning and coordination that made the smooth execution of this program. In conclusion, I believe we have all gained valuable insights from today's technical talk, deepening our understanding of road design considering traffic safety. Let us take this knowledge forward and strive to implement safety practices on our roads, ultimately working towards reducing crashes and saving lives. Thank you once again to everyone involved, and we look forward to hosting more technical talk in this series and continuing this legacy. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all.
Thank you. I want to appreciate your participation. I know it is evening for you. So thank you for taking time out of your evening and also for inviting me to talk here. So I appreciate it. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Looking forward to work with you again also.
Thank you.
So with that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you all. Thank you, ma'am.